So we have to focus, like lasers on what is going to grow the economy, what is going to generate increases in that overall GDP per capita, and there I think you have to look at both the tax and fiscal side. What should your tax and fiscal policy be? But you also have to look at the regulatory reform side. What can you do to lower cost? We've got a growth problem in the UK, and we've got a productivity problem in the UK. I mean, these numbers are, an increase on GDP, but if you look at GDP per capita and you factor in the population increase, GDP per capita is still falling. If you also look at public sector productivity, where we have a particular problem, if that had returned to sort of pre-COVID levels, as opposed to a 10% drop off, then that GDP number would be 1.8% higher. So instead of 0.5. So there is certainly a productivity issue in the UK, and I would agree that it goes back decades. And in the Growth Commission, what we are trying to do is to look at the reasons for this. And it's not just the UK that's been affected by these sort of productivity problems and this slowdown in growth. Particularly as reflected in GDP per capita. We see this
when you talk about GDP per capita falling, Shanker, just to explain to listeners who might not be familiar with that sort of terminology, you basically mean that even if the economy is growing, individual people will not feel richer because their share of the economic growth is falling.
Yeah, because population is increasing. So what GDP per capita reflects is a better reflection of the productivity of your economy, and it's a better reflection of sort of household incomes, if you will. And GDP per capita increases over time because of the effects of compound interest, which has been referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. Over a long period of time, if GDP per capita is a little bit off where it could be, that is magnified massively over time. I mean, one of the economists on our Growth Commission sort of highlighted the fact that if US GDP had been lower by 1% year on year from, let's say, 1890 to 1980, by 1980, the US economy would be smaller than Mexico's. So that gives you an indication when these things are stored up over a long period of time, it creates an enormous problem. So we have to focus, like lasers, on what is going to grow the economy, what is going to generate increases in that overall GDP per capita, and there I think you have to look at both the tax and fiscal side. What should your tax and fiscal policy be? But you also have to look at the regulatory reform side. What can you do to lower cost? Linda, I think, mentioned the various indexes of inflation. One of the things that really affects British people is the very high cost of energy. And so what can we do to lower energy costs? This is a critical lifeblood, piece of the economy, because energy goes into everything. So virtually everything that we buy, energy is a major component of. And as long as energy costs in the UK, which are significantly higher than even continental Europe, even Germany, even with its exposure to Russia, UK energy costs, what consumers are paying for energy, is much higher in the UK, and it's more than double what equivalent energy cost is in the US.